westward we go toward the last buffalo.
Well, that's what we're worried about. That's like the biggest thing going on is the pollution that is happening right now into the bison industry. There are people out there that are breeding Charolais to bison to try to make white bison. And the cattle gene is something that is a remnant from a bad time. Most of us bison people really don't want to see cattle genes in our thing or that mixture happen.
Dr. Durr with Texas A&M recently came out with a paper. He had done genetic analysis on every conservation herd in the country, and he found some amount of cattle integration in each of those herds. Now the question is, does that mean anything? Is it any less of a bison? As far as we can measure, the answer is generally no. We know that if some bison have cattle mitochondrial DNA. The mitochondria is kind of the battery inside the cell. A bison with cattle mitochondrial DNA, they're a little bit smaller. They don't go over winter quite as well. But if it is bison mitochondrial DNA, we've not been able to measure any difference from nuclear DNA in those animals. And there's so much genetic importance in all these different herds that we know there's a little bit of cattle in there, but as far as we can tell, it's a bison. It acts like a bison. Anything you want to add?
We have Ted Turner has 55,000 head of bison. Ted has 55,000 head of bison. And he, in 9 ranches in the United States, he had all of his DNA tested and got rid of everything that wasn't pure. Now, you can pull a hair follicle out of any bison you have and send it to Texas A&M University, and used to be for $12, they would tell you how pure it was. On mine, if they smell like a bison and look like a bison, we call them bison. So to me, it's no big deal. And there is no purebred bison. Every person on here has their own opinion what a good bison looks like, and mine is many times different than other people's. Some like dark ones, some like light ones, some like long ones, some like thick ones, tall ones. There is no right answer to that. So as meat producers, we're trying to get the best quality and the best basic animal we can get out there on the market today, and we're continually trying to improve that. So that's a good question.
I guess last thing I'll add, and he alluded to it, the studies that have been going on, and genetic testing has been kind of the hot topic on the national scale the last 5 years. Yellowstone is always, and I'm not knocking, don't construe this to be a knock on the Yellowstone herd, but they really sold their herd as 100% genetically pure for a long time. Since these studies have come out, they've just disproved that. So it's been something that's kind of going on for a long time, but the whole genetic discussion has kind of waned a little bit because of these tests. Back to, our herd with the 1925, when our animals were sitting on the Briggs Ranch was actually crossbreeding it and trying to produce Catalo. We've all heard of Beefalo, but back then they referred to them as Catalo. So it's nothing new, but from the genetic standpoint, again, if it walks like a duck, acts like a duck. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, so that's a good question. Her question was, the bottleneck in genetic herds, how do we keep that viable? Like they said, they've got a partnership, TNC does, with Wind Cave. Wildlife and Parks herds come from, we get bulls mostly from a lot of different herds. 2 years ago, I went to Teddy Roosevelt and brought 5 2-year-old bulls back from Teddy Roosevelt. A lot of times we trade like TNC does. We've traded with Niobrara, Wind Cave, Custer, Wichita Mountains. That's how we try to keep our genetic purity there. That's how TNC does it. Most of the, I'm good friends with the manager of the Custer herd. They do the same thing. We have a good partnership in the conservation world anyway. And even in the private producers try to keep that genetic vitality within their herds too. And so they'll come to Maxwell. They'll go to Custer just to keep that genetic vitality going.
Yeah, there used to be a lot of talk about the woods bison, and they were in Canada, and the prairie bison down here. And they were a little bigger up there because it's just like deer. The further north you get, the bigger they are to sustain the severe winters. But down now we have so many people moving them around. One of our producers last year bought 30 heifers from Canada. Well, those were supposedly the woods bison, but now they're moved around so much, they're pretty much just bison, and that's it. So we're kind of getting away from that distinction of prairie and woods bison.
Wind Cave is one of the National Park Service herds. It's in western South Dakota. For a long time, when Yellowstone talked about being pure, Wind Cave thought they were pure as well, but we know now that there's some cattle in there. What's special about the Wind Cave herd is that there are some genes in that herd that aren't found elsewhere. And so for that, managing for the full range of bison genetics, we want to make sure that that Wind Cave herd keeps those genes going forward. The Texas A&M also, they looked at the bison samples in the Smithsonian. And thankfully, when they fleshed those out, they didn't do a terribly good job. And they were able to get genetic samples from those animals in the Smithsonian and see the amount of genetic diversity. And then when you look at the bison we have alive today, we certainly lost some through that bottleneck, but much less than you might otherwise expect. And the theory I heard from Dr. Durr was that when Goodnight and others were making these herds, they were pulling bison from quite a range north to south. It wasn't all just from a couple herds. And so just by how things worked out and being fortunate, we have the majority of genetics that were there originally.
On westward we go toward the last buffalo, to the high plains of sturdy short grass, where the great southern herd still a sight beyond words, as it covers the prairie so vast. On the Plum Creek and Turkey Creek, Smoky